Okay, so let's look at a real example, well, a real fictitious example, just to make this a bit easier to try and understand. So let's take our ambulance class that we've got here and see how we would translate that into Python and in a very simplified way. And this is how I might do that. So here I've defined my class and I've called it ambulance. Here my first method is my constructor, my init method, my dunder method. And into that, I'm going to pass in self, because I have to, as the first thing. And then I'll have the name of the trust that we passed in and the registration number. So anything passed in here is basically stuff that when you set up, when you create a new ambulance, when you say you want a new object of type ambulance, these are the things that you will have to specify when you create it, or when you ask for it to be created. So basically this says, when somebody asks for a new ambulance, they'll have to tell me what trust it belongs to and what the registration number is going to be. That's basically what this says. Then within the constructor, it will then assign the name of the trust that is passed in when we ask for a new ambulance. It'll say, okay, that name of trust, that now is assigned to your name of trust. Registration number that's passed in, that now belongs to you, that specific object, that is now assigned to your registration number. We might also have the attributes that are not passed in, i.e. that we don't have to specify when we create the object. So things like whether the patient is on board and whether the siren's going off, we said we'd like those things to be false by default. So the siren's not going off, there's no patient on board. So we can just hard code those. We don't need to have anything passed in. We can just specify by default they are false. So when a new ambulance is created, there is no patient on board and the siren's not going off. And then for the methods, we just write them in exactly the same way we would for any other function, except that we have to pass in self as the first input, even if it's the only input. So here I've got a method called drive. Again, this is a vast simplification. I just print a message saying I'm now driving at whatever speed is passed in when I call the drive method. Similar with park, this just prints a message saying I'm now parked at whatever location is passed in when I call that method. This one here, where I'm going to load up a patient, does a similar thing and passes in the patient name, prints a message. But what it also does is in this case, I say, well, actually, I want to now change. I've got an attribute within the ambulance to a Boolean to indicate whether there's a patient on board. So if I load in a patient, that now needs to be true, not false. And so I need to refer to one of my attributes. And I do that using the self dot notation. I say that the patient on board is effectively a variable value that belongs to me. It is one of my attributes. And so I use self dot, which basically says the copy of the object's patient on board variable. That's what it's saying. And I'll do the same here for some of the other methods as well. And as you can see, a very technical code here for turning on the siren. I couldn't think of anything better.